Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Today we are speaking about public debt matters and IPF's work on debt. And I'm joined by my two colleagues. My name is Veronica Ndegwa. I invite my two colleagues to introduce themselves and the work they do at IPF. And as they introduce themselves, they tell us what is one thing that breaks their heart about Kenya's public finances. We start with you.
Thanks, Veronica. My name is Bernard Jiri. I'm a senior research analyst at the Institute of Public Finance. What annoys me most about public finance management in Kenya is having recommendations by the Auditor General that are not implemented by the government.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Over to you, Martin.
Good afternoon, Veronica and my colleague Bernard. My name is Martin Kabaya. I am a research analyst at the Institute of Public Finance in the Department of Macro, Policy and Debt. And in our country's PFM, that is public finance field, I feel frustrated more so by corruption and the failure of the people responsible to utilize the funds or monies that they are in charge in a manner that is supposed to, and which leads to losses and which leads to the people who are supposed to get services failing to get the same services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin, and we'll get started to get a feel of what IPF does around debt and broadly public finance management. So my first question is to Bernard, and the question is what problem do you see in Kenya's PFM space? And probably you can pick up from your first response on what annoys you.
Thank you for that question. First, it's good to appreciate that over time, public finance management in Kenya has improved, but we still have gaps that exist, especially when you look at, from where I started, having audit reports with key recommendations that the executive arm of government just brushes off. We hardly see government implementing those recommendations by the Auditor General, a key institution that has been established and mandated to do that work by the Constitution. And the other gap that exists is we have a very weak linkage between government allocations and expenditure and service delivery outcomes. We also have gaps, when you look at the budgeting, especially in terms of having equity and gender perspectives. We also have gaps when it comes to how resources are allocated through supplementary budgets. And also, we have limited or inadequate tracking of government policies and fiscal commitments within the PFM space. And also, because of the nature of the debt reports and the budget documents, they are so technical, so that limits the public from engaging effectively and constructively with the policymakers. And that has been a problem, over time. And IPF has been trying to simplify this work more and more, so as the civil society, the citizens, the media can understand these documents and hold the government to account.
Okay, I think you spoke about what is IPF's approach in filling some of these gaps, but probably you can share more what IPF does, and especially any annual, any flagship programs that IPF has that tries to fill the gaps that you have highlighted.
Absolutely. Actually, we have a very unique approach in that as a think tank, we generate evidence, and we generate this evidence using publicly available information. The reason we prefer publicly available information is because it minimizes the chances that there could be misinformation or disinformation, and it makes our work credible in that everybody can verify the kind of research that we do, the analysis we make, and also the kind of research products that we produce. And you have talked about our flagship products. Yes, we have two critical, key documents that we produce annually, one of them being a macro fiscal analytics snapshot, and we also do annual national shadow budget.
All right, and for anyone watching, I think we'd encourage you to visit the Institute of Public Finance website, look up for the macro fiscal analytics snapshot, as well as the annual national shadow budget. So Martin, in the spirit of debunking complex PFM data, what can you tell us about debt in Kenya? What is our current situation? Are we getting out of the hole, or are we digging the hole deeper?
Thank you, Veronica, for the question. And I cannot say we are getting ourselves anytime soon in this hole, because as at now, our public debt stands at over 12 trillion. When you look at the government reports, by the end of the last financial year, that is financial year 2024-2025, we closed with a total debt of 11.8 trillion. And from this one, the external debt, the debt that we've acquired from outside, was 5.4 trillion. And the debt that we've acquired domestically was at 6.3. But as at now, that is the most recent data that we have from the central bank, that is 19th of last month, the domestic debt has surged to around 6.612 trillion. What does that tell you? From the closure of the year up to now, we have borrowed approximately 287 billion, and this is the first quarter of the year. And when you look at the government's document, that is the documents that we use to advise macro policies, we are supposed to borrow domestically this year 613 trillion, but we've already borrowed 287 trillion. That is approximately 47% of what we are supposed to borrow for the year. It tells you that as it happened last year, we might be ending up borrowing more than we are supposed to borrow. And when we talk about the debt, mostly people forget about the pending bills. And to my thinking, pending bills are the obligations that have not been settled. And when you look at our government currently, the national government has a total of 526 billion in pending bills. When you add now what the county owes the suppliers and other people, the county have a pending bill amounting to 195.5 trillion. If you add all these monies together, you'll see that we are at around almost 13 trillion. So that tells you that it's like we are digging the hole more deeper instead of climbing it.
Okay. Yeah. Are you saying we should add the more than 700 billion in pending bills to our domestic debt stock?
Definitely, because it's something that we owe to suppliers and to Kenyans.
Okay, all right. And I think coming back to the question around domestic debt, why should we care about the government borrowing more from the domestic market?
So thank you. As we have said, the government now is concentrating on borrowing more domestically, because when you look at the MTDA, the medium-term debt strategy, and the strategies that we are getting is that we are supposed to borrow more domestically than externally. But when you look at the dynamics of interest on these debts, the domestic market or the domestic debt carries more interest than the external debt. So currently for this year, that is financial year 25-26, the total debt interest that we are going to pay is more than 1 trillion. It stands at almost 1.1 billion. And our total debt service stands at almost 1.74 trillion. So when you look at these figures, you realize that most of our budget, or the biggest chunk of our budget, will be going to debt service, leaving so little to other government operations. So my thinking is we should first of all think of the cost of acquiring this domestic debt, because if averagely we are paying 11% interest to this debt, and for the external debt we are paying 5 to 6%, it means that it's more economical to borrow externally than domestically.
Thank you, Martin. The private sector is struggling because the government is competing with it in terms of borrowing locally. And coming back to you, Bernard, we talked about our work, including on our analysis on debt. So the question would be, has there been any success in terms of our engagements with the government institutions? And where can we even continue working more so that we can influence policy?
Thank you. It's a good question. Like I said, we have a product called Macro Fiscal Analytics Snapshot, and this is a highly analytical document where we first look at how the economy is doing at the macro level, and we go beyond to even look at how poverty numbers look like, how government is doing in terms of revenue mobilization, managing deficits, and we have sector zooms where we look at critical areas like health, gender, wash, agriculture, and other developments that we have within the PFM space. You have asked, what are some of the successes that we have, noted over time out of this evidence that we are generating and out of our engagement with key institutions like the National Treasury and Parliament. And it's true, we have quite a number. For example, poverty has been coming down over time. For example, in the year 2020, poverty rate was at 35%. That has come down to 34% in 2024. The other key success that we can take stock of is how our fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has been coming down. Then the other important achievement, previously the government used to offer project revenue numbers. It's an issue that we flagged over the years, and I can take it as a success that now the way government is setting revenue numbers, it's closer to reality, okay? And that is evident, again, looking at revenue shortfalls that we have, that we had 5 years ago, and the revenue shortfalls that we have, using the most recent data. For example, in the financial year 2019-2020, revenue shortfall as a percentage of GDP was at 3.6%. But as a result of flagging revenue of projections, that government being ambitious, government has been responsive, over time and setting closer to reality targets, and that has again given us a revenue shortfall of as a percentage of GDP at 0.4%, in the financial year 24-25. I think that's a good improvement, and we appreciate that through our engagements with the National Treasury, especially through the submissions that we made to the national tax policy, the submissions that we make, whenever there is a call of public participation during the formulation of medium-term revenue strategy, the National Treasury has been adopting most of our recommendations. So we take pride in that, and we see that as an effort that is giving us expected outcomes. And then IPF has been advocating so much around safeguarding of social spending, and because of that sustained advocacy and engaging based on the evidence that we generate, government has at least maintained social spending over time, and it has even come up, looking at the numbers. For example, social protection, spending on social protection in the financial year 2019-2020 was at 58%. But looking at the numbers that we had in the financial year 24-25, social spending was at 80 billion. So you can see an increase from 58 billion in the financial year 2019-2020 to 80 billion in the financial year 2024-2025. So we can still take stock of that as an achievement based on how we have been advocating for social spending to be safeguarded.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. But sticking with you, and especially around the credibility of the budget numbers, you've said somehow the government has been able to, the fiscal outcomes are close to projections. But one might ask around a question around supplementary budgets. Most of the time we see, by the time we start the year, expenditures will be low, and they're consistently increased over the years. On the revenue side, we start very high, and we keep coming down. So what that means is that by the end of the year, is that we are way above the targeted fiscal deficit. So what would you say about that, and where is the mismatch in terms of budgeting?
Thank you for that good question. Yes, it's true that the issue of supplementary budget, is critical, and it has been abused and misused in this country, in that when the budget is being formulated, remember, the public comes out to give their inputs, and that is the budget that is approved by the National Assembly. But now when it comes to the passing of supplementary budgets, resources are moved, okay? And I can say that the way supplementary budgets are done, it's done in a very politically fragile manner, and that's where the public ends up losing what they wanted to see, delivered to them through the budget, through the inputs that they gave. So this comes because one, Parliament is over time used to bypass the will of the people, and the will of the people is expressed through the public participation forums during the budget formulation stage. Okay, then when we come now to the execution side, whenever there is a revenue shortfall, we always see some programs being affected by cuts, while others are not. Okay, and you have talked about where the disconnect is, and the disconnect definitely is it comes when government revises revenue numbers downwards, but our expenditure is, it's sticky. It can only go upwards. So that at the end of the financial year gives us a fiscal deficit outturn that is higher than what would be expected. Okay, and as a result of that, government ends up borrowing more because there is a revenue shortfall, but the expenditure is sticky upward. So government ends up even borrowing more. Martin has talked about how government exceeded domestic borrowing in the last financial year. Why is that the case? It's because of that disconnect in our fiscal framework, especially the expenditure side and the revenue side.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Coming back to you, Martin, we started with the highlight of our debt levels and the impact of domestic borrowing that you've told us is above 3 billion on a daily basis. So then the question is, what do these numbers say about Kenya's fiscal sustainability?
Thank you for the question, Veronica. When we talk about fiscal sustainability, the issue of the revenues come in. So for the financial year 2025-2026, there is a projection that we will collect around 2.784 ordinary revenues. And at the same time, we have set aside 1.74 trillion to do what? To service the debt. So when you do your maths, you look at the amount that we are going to collect as a country through the taxman and what we are paying for the debt that already is for the debt that we already have, you realize that we are using 63% of our revenue to service debt. That is, in simpler terms, in every 100 bob that the taxman will collect as ordinary revenue, 63 out of these 100 will be used to pay, to settle debt obligations. So what remains? 37%. So a common mwananchi who expects the government to deliver on its promises doesn't really know that it's only 37% of what will be collected is going to fulfill those promises.
Okay, as we work on our revenues, both at the national level and at the county level, do we really need a 4.2 trillion budget at the national level? Of course, it's okay to try to expand our revenues, but is there something we can do about our expenditures? Because the discussion we are having here has shed light on revenues. Yes, they have grown. Of course, we are failing to meet the revenue targets. But then at the same time, we have annual growths in expenditures, but also in-year upward revisions in spending. So the question is there something we can do about our spending, even as we grow our revenues?
Definitely, because I think there is a lot of wastage in our expenditure. And as IPF, we've previously noted that there are areas that the government can look into and cut expenditures. The most recent document that we published on media diagnostic report, we talked about sectors or areas that we are supposed to cut spending on. And out of the 10 areas that we had proposed, only 2 are actualized.
Is it we or the government?
We as IPF and the government also by itself, they had given that indication or that commitment that they would reduce spending on these areas. But in our analysis, we found that only 2 out of the 10 were actualized.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Bernard, in your earlier submissions, you highlighted some of the areas that you've been able to influence positively in terms of policy making. From your perspective, what are some of the thorny issues that we should continue our advocacy efforts on?
Allow me to start by looking at the structural benchmarks that Kenya was not able to meet by the time government was exiting the program earlier this year, that is in March. Some of these include reforms within our PFM systems, issues to do with governance, issues to do with transparency and accountability, and issues to do with state-owned enterprises. So those are among the many unmet structural benchmarks, and they are so critical in that whenever citizens feel the government is not transparent enough, the government is not accountable enough, what results is what we experienced in the year 2024, where citizens, feel that the space that they wanted, the services they wanted delivered have not been delivered. The government cannot even account for what has been corrected. So that creates a very aggressive rebellion or a very aggressive rejection on any additional revenue raising measures. So issues to do with transparency and accountability, governance, and issues to do with the state-owned enterprises, they need to be addressed. They are still thorny issues. The other issue that is still pertinent is revenue shortfalls. Remember, you had asked me earlier where the disconnect is. I talked about the revenue side and being revised downwards, but the expenditure side is sticky upwards. So that disconnect is still thorny. It needs to be addressed. We still have a lot of work to do around revenue, around expenditure. Okay, then debt vulnerability remains high. Martin has just told us how debt service is taking a significant portion of the amount of money that is, the amount of resources mobilized by the Kenya Revenue Authority. So what that means is we continue to crowd out investment in health, investment in education, investment in development because of that debt pressure. And this is evident looking at the recent move by the government to reduce capitation for secondary schools from 22,000 to 16,000. The government also reduced our budgetary allocation for basic education by 17 billion. Those are critical areas. And let me surprise you. In the financial year 2019-2020, government at the national level spent 105 billion on health. Okay? Then that was during COVID. Then over the years, we have seen investment in health fluctuating. And this is happening at a time when donors are withdrawing their funding, especially to critical areas and programs. But instead of the government matching by increasing expenditure on health, what we saw in the financial year 24-25 was, compared to the financial year 2019-2020, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, expenditure was 105 billion. That is financial year 2019-2020. But in the financial year 24-25, expenditure stood at 101 billion. So you can see that kind of a decline at a time when donors are withdrawing, at a time when government is reiterating its commitment on universal health coverage. But that puts to question whether government is indeed committed to universal health coverage. And it's also coming at a time when the health sector is, facing challenges transiting from National Health Insurance Fund to Social Health Insurance Fund.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. What I'm hearing is the Institute of Public Finance still has a lot of work to do around public finances, and especially in how the government is deciding what is priority and what is not priority for its citizens. So thank you both for sharing about your work at the Institute of Public Finance. But as we conclude, the question is, if today you had audience with the Cabinet Secretary in National Treasury, Martin, what one recommendation would you give him? Just one recommendation. You have 1 minute or 30 seconds to give a recommendation. What would you tell him?
Thank you, Veronica. I think the first thing I'll tell him, when the bush is on fire, the chameleon must change its walking style. And again, you don't get out of a pit by digging deep. What does this mean? It means that he has to come up with strategies that will take us out of this debt menace or this pit that we are already in, because if this continues, the stories that we hear from Ghana and other countries of debt restructuring, they will be here with us. And as a country or as citizens, I think it will not be a good thing for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. For you, Bernard, if today the chairperson for the Budget and Appropriations Committee came to you for one recommendation, what would you tell him?
Thank you. I will give my response to summarize everything I have talked about, and the things that in one sentence I would tell a cabinet secretary for national treasury and economic planning or any other policy maker is that in Kenya there is a need for government to work on an expenditure-led fiscal consolidation. There is a need to work on broader economic reforms, and there is a need to work on governance and transparency.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Martin. That has been our time.
Thank you. Thank you.